Alright, so I'm going to talk through centering this clay a little bit on the wheel today. I haven't really done any tutorials yet, so if there's anything specifically that I miss when I go over this today, please feel free to leave a comment, leave some recommendations of things you need help with when it comes to centering. This will just be the first video, and I'll just sort of talk through some things and some tips I've learned for centering clay on the potter's wheel. First things first, when you're trying to seal clay, the moisture on this top bat is an important factor. So if you have a piece of clay dried that's all the way bone dry like this, first you're going to want to wet it down a little bit, and you're going to want to remove that all the way from the top of the bat. So if the clay like this, if you have a disc of clay and you just cut something off and the clay here is still wet, then by all means you can actually throw the clay right on, and you don't have to worry about adding moisture, which I'll go over in a second here. So once I have this cleaned up, you'll notice on top of the wheel head there's a little bit of moisture. You can tell the outside of the bat here is dry. You can see that right here. And there's a little bit of moisture from the water I just put down, okay? You don't want any water, extra water, like this on the wheel head when you go to set this clay down on here. You don't want, you know, free water like this around on the wheel head, but you do want a certain level of moisture. So it's okay, you don't want pure dryness like you see on the outside of the bat right here. So put a little water on your wheel head, and I just kind of guide it with my hand. If you have a ton, if there's too much, you know, if there's too much for just to rub off with the finger, just give it one swipe with a potter sponge real quick. This is what I do at least. And keep in mind, throughout this whole video, you know, everybody throws a little bit differently. I didn't, you know, I'm self-taught. I just learned to throw myself, so there might be things I do unorthodox, and everybody moves and is shaped and is proportioned a little differently. So I'll try to go over a few different things and use what works for you, and if something doesn't work, then just disregard it. So I have this kind of wet. This is still a little too moist. You want to just kind of, just some left around moisture, just enough to help the bottom of this clay stick. So this clay is pretty moist, but it's in plastic condition, so it's not liquid, right? It's stiff. It's not fully saturated with water, but it's still moist. So you want the top of this bat to look something like this. See, there's a little bit of water left over, just enough that this is going to stick when I throw it down. When you go to throw it down here, this doesn't have to be a thunderous. I see a lot of people really throwing clay hard into the center of the wheel. I wouldn't leave too much to wheel wedging, which is just continuing to press it up and down. Some people will take a really messy ball clay. As you can see, I actually wedged this, spiral wedged it, and then slightly ram's horn wedged it into sort of a cone shape that'll fit on top of the wheel. And I give it a few slams on the table to flatten the bottom, and that's going to stick really nicely right here. So before my moisture comes off of my bat here, I'm going to throw this one down. And see, you can just take any little leftover moisture on the bat head and kind of push it around evenly. So we're moist here. I'm going to aim right for the center here. It doesn't have to be a huge thunderous slam. You honestly don't have to slam at all. You can just set like this. And if you're having trouble centering, just start like this for a little bit. See, just setting it down, you can tell I'm 99% in the center there. But if you set your clay down, say here, and you spin then you can obviously see this is still a little off center. It's not that important, honestly. If you're strong enough and you really can move the large amounts of clay quick, you could center from right here. It's just a little extra trouble you don't need though. So instead of slamming down super hard, either honestly, when you're first learning, go ahead and just set the clay down and then slap from there. Or, you know, if you don't struggle with getting it in the center of the wheel on your first slap, go ahead, give it a slap. Like my slap just there was a little bit off, but then I just kind of drag the clay into the center, and now I'm just giving slight turns and little pushes down into the wheel, just kind of securing it on there and compressing on there before I get started. Now as you can see, after I did that and altered it, see, it's a little off, but it's close enough to start centering. The first thing you want to do is really get this clay at the base here fixed to the bottom of the wheel head, because how you seal this clay right here is what's going to fix that clay to the top of the wheel so you can really start putting bigger forces on it, okay? So if you're struggling, again, something you can do right when you get the clay in the center of the wheel head like this, very lightly touch here because it's not wet yet, but just take one finger and don't let it move and seal the clay into the top of the bat head. Now you have at least a little more foundation for this clay, and it's fixed to the wheel a little better before you start putting forces on it. Okay, I like the benefit of a sponge is you can kind of pick up a decent amount of water in it. I just dipped it in water there. You can see it's fully saturated, and now I can just hold this water here instead of continuously having to dip and dip and dip and dip my hand over and over and over again. When you're centering, this is actually the part of the process of throwing where you want the wheel kind of spinning relatively fast. So first things first, don't overdo it with water, but just put enough water on to wet down the body of your clay. And then I'm right-handed, I hold this sponge in my right hand, and I place my right hand on top, and I take my left hand and put it just at the beginning, not throughout the entire throw, but at the beginning I put it at about 7 o'clock. And you want to brace your arms and your entire body around the wheel. Get your knees hugged up around the wheel head, holding onto this plastic. Take a deep breath in, kind of squeeze your belly, keep your whole body tight, especially during the centering process when you first get the clay on the wheel and you're moving a large body of clay at once. Make sure everything's tight. Use your whole body for this, okay? Don't rely just on your arms, because then you'll see that's when the clay will start moving you instead of you move the clay. So in order for you to move the clay, you're going to need to use the steadiness of your entire body working together, okay? So right here, at about 7 o'clock, and I'm pressing, I'm not letting my hand or myself move. And now I'm slightly putting a little pressure on top too, and sliding my left hand up, okay? Now see how we just got a basic cone and a basic centered shape in that wheel? I didn't go to war with it. I basically kept my arm here and let the clay hit my hand, right? The clay was putting pressure on my hand, almost. I was just staying exactly the same. So now that we have it basically ready in its first form to be coned up, what we're going to do is put pressure with both of our hands now, still braced, same good posture, but using the inside of these hands right here, especially this bone right here when you're first trying to move this clay together on both sides evenly at about 4 and what is that? 8:30, right? 4 and 8. Either way, it's on the sides of the clay, whatever feels right to you. Your angle might be a little more out. Your angle might like to be a little more braced in, depending on how big the clay is, right? So again, slightly wet this down. I keep the sponge in my hand. You don't have to. If that's too hard for you at this point, just go ahead and get your water out. Set your sponge down, and then really aim for the bone. Okay, if you really want to move clay at the beginning here, use that bone. Press down against the wheel first, and then in towards the center, and wrap your fingers around. I recommend not interlocking them, but like this. Try not to interlock like this, but overlap them and slide up, okay? This is why I like to keep the sponge in my hand while I do this, because then you can constantly keep the form. As you can see, it's kind of dried out now. Not dried out, but the initial water on the outside of it is kind of worn out from that. You have to put a lot of force on. So what I like to do is just hold the sponge in my hand, and it kind of continuously gives moisture to the surface of the body of the clay. And same thing. The main thing when you're doing this, when you first start, is the clay is going to want to move you, right? The clay is going to want to move you, and ultimately you're going to end up with wobbliness like this, right? So the main thing you should focus on at first is getting this clay up straight and keeping your hands and your movements still. See how I'm moving up in a straight line, still and steady, and the clay is following. When you get to the top of this clay, if you do have to let go of the clay for any reason, you never want to do it quickly. See how that was too quick? Slowly get up. When you get to the end of your pool, if you have to let go to rewater for whatever reason, slowly let go. And that's any time you're throwing, not just centering, okay? Once you do have a cone up, this is kind of a drastic cone. It doesn't have to be this coned up. But once you do have it coned up, and if you do have a larger piece of clay that you have to bring into a larger cone, on the way down, I slightly bend the clay backwards with my right hand and support with my left hand. Because I'm right-handed, it'll be mirrored if you're left-handed, obviously. But with the palm about right here, I just take this clay and push slightly back and then down on top. And I support the whole body of the clay with my left hand, okay? And I'm just gonna do that, and I'm gonna say steady. All the way down. Okay? Press, press, press all the way to the base, and slowly release. It might not be perfect yet, that's okay. But if you think about the clay internally, not just the surface of it, you just stretched it out and pushed it all, compressed it. Stretched it and compressed it. And you know, if you have air bubbles or it's still inconsistent at this point, you can repeat this process as many times as you need to. And every time you do, you're gonna homogenize the clay and make it more consistent. Okay, so I'll go through that a couple more times in real speed, just so you can watch, okay? So here's once, I'm gonna press in, slide my hands up. See, I didn't have the sponge there. That's okay, sometimes I just get it started, do it halfway, take your time. You can always, you know, you can always just give it another pass. So here again, press down and in, and slide up, and slide down. It actually, you know, it doesn't have to bend the clay. I said backwards. You don't have to necessarily bend the clay straight backwards. You'll just notice that if you give it a little bend, overall it comes out better at the end, and you'll have a little less problem of mushrooming. So let me show you what I mean by that. If you come straight up like this, you cone straight up. That's about as tall as you really would need to make the cone if you're using the right pressure. You don't have to make it super tall like I was, but like I was saying, you bend back. It doesn't necessarily have to be straight back, okay? The reason why, you just want to give a little bit of a bend anyway, off center and then down, because this is what happens if you just push straight down on top and to the side. What I was saying is you get a little bit of a mushroom. Do you see this mushroom growing here? Then you're gonna have to like push it and re-wedge it back into the side of your clay, and you don't want that. It's gonna, you could create an extra air bubble that way. That's what I mean by this. Whatever direction, I actually bring it forward. I'll push forward and down just a little bit. And see, you'll get a little bit of mushroom still, but you can work that down later once you get closer to the base or the head of the wheel, if that makes sense. Keep in mind too, I mean, get the thing 99% centered and then get going, right? If it's, you know, it doesn't, the final form needs to be as perfectly centered as possible. But if it's not perfectly centered, especially when you're coning up, that's okay. That's the point of centering. And you also will still be able to center a little bit as you open up and begin to pull the walls. But you don't want to rely on that. You want to get good at centering. So one thing I'll give, if you really have if you're having trouble, you have a stiff piece of clay, you're having trouble moving this clay and you want to move more at once, or maybe you're not a super physically strong and you want to rely more on the technique and you don't really have the muscle to push the amount of clay you want. Like say you're an average sized person but you want to go for it and throw 100 pounds at once. Doing this might not work that good, right? You need a way to put more of your body force, put more of a force on the clay at least, and move more at once. So to move it more drastically, what I'll do is I'll brace again and I'll push here with this hand, but I'll pull directly against that with my fingers here, okay? And don't get it. I said like this when you are centering like this. I had said to use the inside, and that's true. But don't discount everything that your fingers will be doing in centering and throwing. A lot of people just think your fingers become involved once you start throwing the walls up. That's not true. Your fingers are very, very involved in the control of centering large pieces of clay too. The heels of your hand here, the base of the palm of your hand, the bones here, are really what's going to put the force on the clay and move the clay. But as far as controlling and shaping and centering the clay, you have a ton of control with your fingers here. So, like I said, if you want to move this clay, more of it, quicker, put a more drastic force on it. So brace, anchor here with your arm into your hip. Anchor, base of your hand, bone into the base of the clay, and use these fingers and really pull straight against this line right here. Pull straight against your forearm, and you'll notice that you can really pull the clay. It's a bit more aggressive, but you can really move it. So that's what I mean by that. If you're having a little trouble moving a larger piece of clay, get your fingers involved. Make them strong and get your fingers involved, okay? So cone up. And last time here, a little forward, and take your time, don't gotta rush it. Very slow and steady. Let the wheel do the work. That's what I was saying about, you might not even be physically weak. It might just be such a large and stiff piece of clay that you're not gonna outmuscle it. And even if it's not a large and a stiff piece of clay, even if it's a small piece of clay, after you throw 500 of them in a row, you know, it starts to wear on you. So rely on the power of the wheel, rely on the motor. Let that do the work. Don't sacrifice the vertebrae in your back. Alrighty, so I'll do one more from start to finish without talking, and then if you have any more questions, please leave a comment. I will do whatever you're struggling with. Leave a comment, let me know, and I will make videos. So last time, here we go. A lot of times too, clay becomes easier to work with, or the clay body, this itself, it becomes, more malleable the more you get it wedged and worked on this wheel. There is a point where you're going to overwork it. There is a point where you're going to overwork and over center, and but it really takes a lot to do that to a piece of clay. I just noticed on this last cone down right here, each time I keep coning it, and for the purpose of this video, I've coned this piece of clay up and down a few times now, and I just noticed on the last one each time I had to put less and less pressure and less muscle into it on the way down, and I could rely more and more on the power of the wheel, okay? So again, like I said, any questions, please leave a comment. This is the first time I've really done a video like this. I know there's not a lot of organization to it. It's just sort of thinking out loud. So if you have anything you're struggling with, please let me know. I'd love to make a video. Thanks for watching.